Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's second episode of the week of Church is Stupid.
Comma butt.
I'm Andy.
I'm Ruth.
I'm Elijah.
You tried to jump the gun there, didn't you, bud?
I did.
He was
You
really
looked at me
excited.
first.
I did. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much.
You started making those weird noises, so I'm like, all right, I'm just going to let it happen. Anyhow.
Yes, we're on our second episode of the week. So if you have not already had the chance to listen to the beginning parts of this argument conversation, it's more of a conversation this week about young student ministries and young adult ministries and all of that type of thing, then go ahead and tune in on Spotify, Apple Music, and a whole bunch of other podcast sites that we are now a part of, as well as YouTube. And if you want to leave us some comments, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of those are available platforms to reach out to us on and let us know what about your thoughts about the first episode or any other episode from before this. That all of them are now on Spotify and Apple Music. And we're pushing really hard for that because it's a newer-ish thing, and we forgot to do it at the beginning of last episode.
Heck yeah.
I also like how legit we sound now. I was like listening to Andy, I'm like, whoa, you're so legit. And I was like, wait, I'm on this podcast. Yeah, I'm legit.
I don't think I've ever changed, so I've always been legit, please.
Oh, well, okay, I'm the lame old person. We already had this conversation. I'm like, 5 years older than you? I'm 3 years older than Elijah. So I have no room on this podcast for young people. Because that's our topic. That's what I'm saying for this week's topic.
Why don't you segue us into that then, huh?
That was a really bad attempt at a segue
Yeah.
that failed, like, crash and
honest,
burn.
dude.
I think you're doing great. Just keep on rolling.
My wheelchair around.
No.
You're trying to make yourself really, really old. That's acceptable.
My name is Ruth.
Yep.
And I'm a pastor.
Yep.
You understand that every single time I go to like a pastor meet with any, like when I meet the church for the first time, anything like that, they're like, oh, we expected something different. And I'm like,
Older.
yup, you all expected me to be
your
real
gray hairs
old.
don't do very well at hiding it.
You know, you didn't have to bring up the gray hairs that they can't see because we're on voice only, but thanks.
Well, sometimes there are pictures.
For now.
For now. No, yes, I have a ton of gray hairs, and I think part of that's because I'm a pastor. But mostly it's just bad genes.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Maybe you should, just get a new pair. So our topic for today, this Thursday episode of Church is Stupid.
Comma butt.
Thank you. We are looking at some of the college ministries that are out there, as well as just like different aspects that affect some college students. Because last time we focused a lot on high school and middle school and all that kind of stuff. And so now we get to look at the college age group, which I am still presently a part of because I refuse to graduate at this point, I think is the extent of what it is.
That's really what it seems like.
Yeah, it brings tears to my eye every time.
That's all right, Andy. It's all right. You'll graduate someday. When you're my age.
Soon. I really want to. I just want out.
When you're my age, Andy. Is it going to hurt more if I said I graduated with my master's at 24?
No,
Okay, good.
I don't care enough about
I just
you.
wanted to brag about myself
Okay.
for a minute and be like, look at me, which is
Yeah.
it's a very normal age to get your master's, but I wanted to
Probably.
pretend.
So yes, we're talking about college ministries, and I know from my point of view there are several, and several of them have major issues. But that's from my point of view, and my point of view is scuffed because I went to MSU, and we've had some interesting issues there.
Yeah, and I think there's the big issue for me and with this is that a large portion of young adults, again, I had spoken very, very briefly on how my generation before Andy made fun of me because that's not his generation, is called the lost generation. And a lot of that has to do with the fact there's just nothing for us. There's nothing for college age. College age is a little bit easier because at least they do have some programs on campuses. I know the UMC has Wesley houses, I believe they're called. I should know that. Sorry to my friends who work there. Anyhow, but it's a group that's just really not pinpointed very well. And it's a large age gap. I feel like it's not until you're about 40 plus that there starts to be stuff that feels more geared towards you. And from in my experience, a lot of the conversations I've had, because a lot of churches will say, we want young people. In fact, every church that I have ever gone to says that's who we want to target. And that's really a wonderful goal. But in a lot of these churches where I have represented the young person in the room before I turned so ancient at 27, I would suggest ideas, and it was like, no, young people don't really want that. And I was like, what? You know, I've sat in trainings in all sorts of these things that basically have sat there and told me what young people want, and they're being led by like 50 years plus people, and I'm like, you guys, maybe you should not do that. Let's take a minute and listen to what the young adults want. But I think the problem is there's such a big, and we can see it in our country right now. There's a huge generational gap that happened. And a lot of that has to do with how quickly culture changed. If we look at, again, that 3-year difference that we talked about on last episode between me and Elijah makes a lot of difference in how we process information. And my favorite example of that is Elijah will tell me about friends that he has. Like, oh, cool, where'd you meet this friend? Oh, gaming online. And I look at him, I'm like, no, you can't talk to strangers online because they're all gonna attack you. Because that's what I was raised to think. And it wasn't like my parents super sheltered me and that's what they raised me to think. It's just like, that's what schools would teach you. That was all of the information that was presented to me, was that if somebody talks to you on AIM, if anybody remembers AIM, which you two are probably looking at me like I'm crazy, AOL Instant Messenger.
Oh, I know what it is. I never grew up with it.
But if somebody messaged you that you didn't know, if you were in a chat group that was like about something you wanted to, I don't know chat groups because I never did those. But regardless, don't talk to these strange people because they're probably a creeper. And then for Elijah to tell me that most of his friends were, or not most, but a lot of his friends were from online groups, was very confusing for me for a while. And so it's like, we almost speak a different language. And we're only 3 years apart, so how much more?
And we're married.
And we're married. You're stuck with me. You're welcome. I'm the worst. And so how much more of an age gap or generational gap is there between millennials and boomers, for instance? And we see this play out on social media so much. Half the time I'll show Elijah some sort of ridiculous meme, and he'll go, "That's a boomer meme, Ruth, because this is what I sound like because I'm Elijah."
Yeah. That's pretty accurate, honestly.
I believe I'm sitting at the table with 2 Elijahs right now. What is going?
Yeah, because I'm Elijah.
How did your voice come from over there? You're sitting over
Elijah,
here.
what are you doing?
But honestly, it's almost like being a boomer is negative in a millennial's eyes, and being a millennial is negative in a boomer's eyes. And it's just kind of crazy to see how that's played out. Like, I hear people, as somebody who's involved in ministry, a majority of the people I talk to are not millennials, because again, lost generation. But I hear like, oh, they're so entitled. Millennials are so entitled. They want everything. And then I hear millennials talk about boomers and say they're so old. They don't want to push for anything. They don't understand anything. And you just end up with a lot of fighting. So when it comes to understanding each other, we're starting from these divided places. Because if we pretend like those don't affect the church, that's ridiculous. They do. And you're coming from this staunch point where it's like, if a millennial says something like, for instance, one of the biggest things we deal with, again, I know I've plugged this a million times, student loan debt, where we talk about our student loan debt as crippling, because it is. And then somebody from the older generation says, well, you took on those loans, it's your fault. And stop being entitled. Why do you feel like somebody should pay off the loans you took? And it's just kind of a lack of understanding. And then vice versa, a lack of understanding for the millennials to understand how the process worked and how much more adult you were at 18 when they were growing up than we really are now.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
There's a few other issues there, especially with the loans and
Well,
like
yeah.
just talking about college, which cost, I don't know, a few $1,000s for your entire degree back then, but now costs a few $100,000 for your
For your semester. Oh, not quite that bad, but still.
books cost $1,000 on their own per semester, but that's not the point.
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
just being
But that's just one example of something that's a very divisive issue amongst boomers. And so things that I have suggested in ministry is if we really wanted to target young adults and college young adults is to offer some student loan alleviation help. And that doesn't get received very well. And that's because it comes down to this entitlement thing. And so there's just generational conversations. So when I sit on a lot of these things, I feel like that's what happens, is we go up against that generational gap. And I know I'm saying this, and I'm totally ignoring Gen Zs when I'm talking to two Gen Zers here. You are Gen Z.
Okay.
Elijah's pretty much the oldest Gen Z that you can be.
So according to the one,
He's a zillennial.
I'm basically one of the oldest that you can be while still being in Generation Z, technically, if we're going by the one study that we were reading into, because there's no real defining
Yeah,
thing.
that's
We could get into that again, and then I could go on for like an hour about it, but
we don't need to right now.
Well, and I don't, yeah. So I just brought that up as like an illustration of things that come up against. So the ideals, I feel like, and the way church runs for people who are millennials and younger, and I'm sure even there's a difference between millennials and Gen Zers, but the way that church is run is so different in our heads than it is for an older generation. And so ultimately, when you have one voice at the table who is 27 and the rest of the voices are not 27, are a little bit older, it can feel very validating to turn down the ideas of the 27-year-old. Does that make sense? Because there's so many more people saying, well, no, I just don't think that's a good idea, and it goes against our ideals. But what's happening is you can only take no so many times
before you leave.
yeah.
And it feels like churches, not all churches, but some churches want young people who look exactly like them. They don't really want young people. And as we've learned from anybody who has a family, knows that you don't always get along. You don't get to choose your family. And there's going to be disagreements. You don't agree on everything, but you still come together and love one another, and you figure out compromises and how to make things work, at least in a healthy family.
Yeah.
And in the church, we're not really good at that. We're not good at bridging that gap. And in a lot of ways, I think we've furthered that divide by rejecting a lot of younger ideas. And this is one of the rare examples. I'm doing the thing where I talk a lot again, guys, but I always do that.
You're allowed. You have a lot of opinions. It's okay.
I'm so opinionated. It's such a problem. It's the only pink shirt I ever owned. It said, "I'm so opinionated." Or like, I trust other people's opinions, but I'm always right, or something like that. Anyhow, sorry.
Just
Nobody
continue,
else.
please.
Need a momentary break.
No, yeah, nobody
We'll just
else.
skip over that.
Yeah, we're just going to edit that out. But this podcast is a very rare exception, and I've been so blessed. We have a very supportive head pastor here who is very, and leadership staff as well. It's not just
You don't just have to give her admirations because she's listening. I love you, Mom, but
but truthfully, if I were to tell a head pastor or even a church that I really wanted to start this podcast called Church is Stupid, which was the initial name of this podcast, they would have looked at me and been like, that is the worst thing I have ever heard. But your mom and the leadership staff here at Midland First, they were really, really receptive. I mean, they didn't all understand it, but they were really, really receptive. And we found there does seem to be an audience because someone's listening. And that's really, really cool. But that's not the experience everywhere.
And even to say with this podcast, it's not as though it has been without issue. but I think a lot of our issues have come from an opposite place where we were not expecting them to come from at all.
Yeah.
That being said, we don't need to call out and embrace the physical issues of this in case people may be listening that would take offense to some of the things. And so just to move forward with other ideas and other problems that have happened and other things. But to bring back to this college idea, I'm going to share a little bit of my personal experience being the youngest one of us and the one, who
is still in college.
Yeah, and still in college. About my freshman year, you have this large orientation kind of thing where you get to see all of these different groups that are on campus. And so you have like the very large Christian groups of crew of, Catholic Spartans or Spartan. I don't remember what the exact name is. I apologize. But you have these very large groups that take on the different forms. And the group that I ended up creating allegiances with or something like that, I guess, is the fraternity that I actually
creating allegiances.
I didn't want it to come across like I was saying like the dark force that I work for.
We already talked about that last week.
I didn't know how to. Okay, the group that I started to do things with and enjoy my time with was Beta Upsilon Chi, which is Christian fraternity around campus, which up here in the northern parts of the United States is not so favorable. Not even like the group isn't favorable. Just Christian fraternities get a bad rep up here.
Really?
Whereas, I found it just completely surprising too. When my freshman year, we went to a leadership conference of such because I was elected as, I don't remember my position for that year, but I was elected as one of the positions. And so we went down to Texas. We had a plane flight paid for and everything. And we went down to Texas and we met up with all of the other Christian fraternity leadership guys that were all there from all of the colleges that are down south there. And they even give it their own, I guess it's not their own name for it. Everybody calls it that, but the Bible Belt of the United States. And they perfectly know that they are in the Bible Belt of the United States. And because of that, they are extremely successful. And so you have Arkansas, I think it was, who had 100 guys rush the fraternity, and they actually had to turn people away because they just were too many. And so you have all of this, and up here in the north, it was unheard of. If you were going to join a Christian organization on campus, the furthest extent of what you may do is crew, and crew is like your weekly Bible study, your weekly meetup worship kind of thing. It's something that you do outside of normally going to church kind of thing. Oh gosh, I was going someplace and I've completely forgot where I'm going because of that. Crew actually had issues with us here at MSU and issues with us forming as a group because of different reasons and all that kind of stuff. And so there became bad blood between that very extremely large organization that was the Christian organization on campus, is still the Christian. Actually, I guess nobody's on campus anymore.
Fair
enough.
But they didn't have the best of taste towards us as a group because we were taking men of God and we were bringing them in towards this more close-knit organization, which we were completely open to anybody joining. It wasn't it wasn't like a get out kind of thing. But yeah, and so there were just different issues with that kind of a thing. And so your larger organizations, especially on campuses and all that kind of stuff, they have a lot of power when it comes to the religious side of life. And so there's just a lot of different conflicts that we see, especially for me as a college-age student, embracing campus for the first time.
That's so intriguing. The war between, was it almost a power struggle?
No, because it was, I don't know how to describe it. In essence, we started as a group of guys who, a majority of them, and I wasn't here during the founding, it happened 2 or 3 years before I even came to campus, but a group of guys from crew were we want to be stronger in our faith and we want to be able to support each other more. And so they started conversations about becoming a part of Bucks, the fraternity. And so they started conversations about opening the fraternity, and essentially what happened is the crew people were to the extent of you can't do both. You have to choose. You can either be in crew or you can be a part of Bucks.
Wow.
And so that led to a lot of conflicts and a lot of their leadership, which they say it's student-led, but it's not student-led.
Yeah.
Their leadership, which is the older men that were involved with crew, were just like, you guys, you can't. And since then, in our recent years before, are disbanding because we weren't getting the guys. We got better relationships with them. And I think that's because they more understood our vision of everything, because it was an entire conflict in itself. But there's a lot of conflicts when it comes to different Christian organizations, wherever it is. It's not just church that's stupid. That's just kind of where tie back in a little bit. But also as just a college student, going to all of the churches that are around campus, nothing ever spoke to me. It was always like, we do church and we do youth ministries, or we do church and we have something else. It's not like we do church. It's not like the youth and the younger members of the church are part of the church. And it wasn't until my first senior year that a roommate of mine brought me to a church that was pretty far away from campus and everything, that actually supported all of the college ministries, that actually supported everybody. And it was one of the most phenomenal worship services I had been to since being on campus. And my biggest problem at that point is just that I was turned off from church.
Yeah.
Well, and I think you highlighted something that's really important, and that I do want to touch on, because I don't think what us young folk want is a takeover. We don't want a takeover. We need generational worship. We need kids to be present. We need teenagers. We need college-age kids. We need young families. We need middle-aged. We need our elders. It's part of what makes the church so beautiful. You know, I heard a pastor once who said one of the reasons they love their job is that you get to see the full life cycle. You're there for the birth of babies, and you're there for the death. And in a way, it's beautiful. And the more I've been in ministry, the more I've seen one side, but not really the other as much. And it's just sad. We don't want, like, I always hear, wow, them young folk, they want that contemporary music, and they want fog machines, they want mood lighting, they want all these things. And I'm like, okay, those things they can be nice and they can be fun, but what we really want, at least, I guess maybe I shouldn't speak for everyone, but we want relationship. We want relationship, connection, and to see real ministry happening. Because it's very hard to go to a church that says that they support all of these things, but then during the week, they don't really do anything. They're open Sunday morning and they do nothing. And I think for young Christians, we're honestly just kind of sick of seeing that. Because what's the point? Why would I go spend an hour here when there's no transformation happening? There's no viewing of the Christian life. And that's not true of all churches. And sometimes I think churches just aren't good about highlighting what they do. Sometimes there are churches that are very active around, but people just don't know. And I think that drawing in young people, at least a church that I would love to be a part of, is one that really sought to make children feel just as comfortable in a worship service as anybody else. That sought to make somebody who went to college, somebody who didn't make to college, that they all felt welcome. But they were also going out and making it not about a worship service. A worship service should never be the focus of a church. And if it is, I think you've gone wrong. And maybe I'm controversial, but I really do, because the Christian life is so much more than that. It's so much more than 1 hour on a Sunday. And we're fed up with it. We don't want to see it. We don't want to waste our time especially in the morning. Because I don't like
Oh my
mornings. Some people are morning people. I am not a morning person. But we don't want to waste our time on something that doesn't really feel like any different than any other club we could join.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're going to join a club, we might as well go to one where we're not going to be judged for being our age.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Is that a fair synopsis?
I think
mean,
so.
My biggest complaint about what we said is I love fog machines and very sparkly lights, but that's just me, and I'm
Well-
biased.
Well, but also, like I said, those things aren't bad, but
Yeah.
I think at the core, would you rather have that or a church that you could build a relationship with?
Definitely the relationship. I was
Yeah.
just
I know.
purely being fun and out of what I've seen
We
churches
don't
do
joke
in
here.
both. I quit. Yeah.
Done.
I'm done. That's it.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
But again, and I know I've made this example before, and I think it's still one of the best examples of what I've seen is Hillsong, and what they've done in Australia. And I know I've seen some some churches do amazing things when it comes to youth ministries and when it comes to including the youth in their church and making it so that a service is not just about like preaching to one generation. It's about reaching everybody and like creating a space that's safe and like people can talk and all this. Where am I going with this? Where did I start? Hillsong is doing an amazing job at that. And I know my brother is still over there and still doing work with them because they have been amazing to him in his faith journey. Like a church can be the place where faith is fostered
Absolutely.
and grown and all of this. It's not all on an individual to do all of their faith walk alone. There are a lot of churches that are trying to reach out there and be there and be able to be a guiding path. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is it's not all bad. Some churches are doing an amazing job with their
Absolutely.
youth.
And I think, again, our heart is to try to open up conversation to encourage churches to become like that, or to celebrate the fact that there are churches that are like that, but to also seek to have churches grow and to be better. It's not to just sit here and vent for an hour, but it's to really try to push us all to grow together. Because I'm sure I am just as guilty. And in my last minute or so, because I'm always like that, I also want to highlight just a little another group that's kind of forgotten is college-age students who don't go to college. Churches aren't always that great at putting up ministries for them, and there's a lot more than we think there are. And I think that can be very. Again, we talked about at Christmas some things that the church do that are a little bit elitist, unintentionally. But that's one group that I also think we could create more room for is that age group, but not necessarily attending a college where they could even have two warring ministries, but instead they're just completely kind of forgotten. So, Elijah, do you have any thoughts? You've barely spoken.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I haven't really. I don't think I can relate as much with the discussions that the experiences that you guys have had with the aspects that we've talked about as much. It's been very interesting to listen to though and take in.
Well, and thank you for bringing your perspective of a youth group that you felt did run well.
Yeah,
And so we appreciate having you on. I have to say that I'm married to you, so.
I get it.
I appreciate it too. I'll just let you know that, even though I'm.
Thank
not
you
married
so
to
much.
you.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
We will have to fix that in the future.
Hang on.
We're butting you out.
That's fair.
So we are coming to the end of our podcast time,
Yes.
which gives us a little bit of time to do a wrap up. Tell you guys a piece of information that we told you at the beginning. If you are watching on YouTube or seeing our links through Facebook, we are available now on Spotify, on Apple Music, Apple Podcast, and several other podcast platforms that are out there. So go ahead and take a look for us on wherever you want to hear a podcast, and you can much easier now listen to us on a phone or other device, and you can close out of the window and still be able to listen to us while you do everything else in your day. That being said, we still will upload to YouTube for those who find that as an easy source. And we'll continue to send out links on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of the social media platforms that we're on.
Yep. And again, thank you, Kate. You're the best. Shout out to our social media director.
Yes. And so, what are your thoughts? What are your comments? What do you want us to know about your thoughts about today's conversation? Leave us a comment in the Facebook description, in the YouTube description, in the Instagram.
The comments,
wherever you're listening at, or wherever you find the easiest place to leave a comment at.
Absolutely.
Sorry that I rambled. For all of us here at Church is Stupid, I'm Andy.
I'm Elijah.
I'm Ruth.
And that has been your Thursday episode.